Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his work, the Novum Organum, Francis Bacon distinguishes and discusses four things that he calls idols of the human mind, and these are ways in which we human beings tend to go astray in our reasoning, our thinking, our engagement with the entire world of nature. And the second of these is one that you can either call the idols of the den or of the cave. He actually uses both terms, and you can find both in English translations. I would say it's more common that you see cave, but he does use the word den or specus before that. And the general idea here, as we find in the very first discussion of it, is that we have a number of mistaken ways of going about things that don't have to do with the human race as such, the way the idols of the tribe did, but rather they're inherent or they're involved in each individual human being. And in section 42, where he begins introducing this, he is going to give us a number of, we could say, origins for these kinds of mistaken dispositions. So he talks about, first, this, each of us having our own individual den or cavern, which intercepts and corrupts the light of nature. Why? Well, one could be from our peculiar or singular disposition, our natura in this case, actually, our very nature. You might think of this as temperament or just the way somebody's put together. Some people can't really pay very close attention. They're easily distracted. Maybe that lies in their particular nature. And then the second thing is, we could say, comes from other people, but it's appropriated by oneself. He talks about education and intercourse with others. So, our education, for most of us, we have grown up in a world in which this is quite important. Education doesn't just mean formal education. It could be also on-the-job training. It could be apprenticeship. And, more broad than this are engagements with other people. We get all sorts of crazy ideas from what other people say or do and the inferences that we draw from them. The third thing that he talks about is reading. So we read books or blog posts or whatever else it's going to be, pamphlets back in their time, broadsheets, things like that. And we take those things as being true or correct. So he says, from reading and the authority acquired by those who he reverences and admires. So this could be authors. We read somebody and we're like, oh man, this person really has it figured out. And I think in our own time, this could not just be books that we read, but TV shows that we watch, podcasts, video channels, anything where we're taking in what we think to be good information, good explanations of things. And then we accord a certain kind of authority to the people that comes from. But that's us. That's us making our own little cave. Then he talks as well about different impressions that are going to be, given to the human mind, he says, as it happens to be preoccupied and predisposed, or equable and tranquil, or the like, so that the spirit of the human being, according to its several dispositions, is variable, confused, and as it were actuated by chance. So that sounds like more situational factors, we might say. And then he closes this passage by bringing up Heraclitus, the great pre-Socratic philosopher, who says, according to Bacon, that men search for knowledge in lesser worlds and not in the greater or common world. We're all involved in this big, vast universe, but we focus on our little portion and our little representation of it. So those are, sources for these things. Then in 58, where he's summing things up, he's going to talk about 4 main manners in which we go wrong, right? So one of these is what he calls the predominant pursuit, the thing that the person is really focused upon, motivated by. Another is translated in this particular English translation as analysis and synthesis. The Latin is actually compositionis et divisionis, which, analysis and synthesis. Analysis is taking things apart, divisiones, right? And synthesis is putting things together, compositiones. I don't think that's a bad translation. Could be a little bit misleading depending on what you think analysis and synthesis is, but now that we've got it explained, it should make sense. Another one is partisanship for particular ages, as he's going to talk about it, meaning ancient versus modern. In our own time, we could have more than 2 options for this. We could actually do it across cultures. Western culture, no good, Eastern philosophy, if there even was such a thing as Eastern as opposed to Western, rather than these vast cultural spheres like, East Asian, largely Chinese driven for the first part, South Asian, and then other things as well. People become partisans of those, don't they? And that would be an example of the idol of the cave. And then what he calls the extent or the narrowness of the subject matter. And there he's summing up, but in the 4 preceding sections, he is explaining how each of these actually work. So we begin with section 54, where he says, some men become attached to particular sciences and contemplations. How does this happen? Well, they suppose themselves the authors and inventors of them, or having bestowed the greatest pains on these subjects, and thus become most habituated to them. So either you come up with like a new thing yourself, and he's going to talk about Aristotle in this case, or you study a lot of somebody and you're convinced that their point of view is actually the right one. You've invested so much time in it. Maybe there's a little bit of sunk cost fallacy there, and you decide that that must be the truth, right? So he's going to actually bring up, as I mentioned, Aristotle. I don't know that this is really a fair accusation. He says that Aristotle affords us a great example because he made his natural philosophy completely subservient to his logic and rendered it little more than useless and disputatious. When I read Aristotle's natural philosophical works, I have a hard time seeing that in there. Maybe Bacon himself is a little bit subject to his own idols in that, but it's definitely not useful, we could say, right? And Aristotelians definitely were taking Aristotelian logic and not just applying it to the natural sciences, but even to the ethics, where it doesn't work well at all. And then he brings up chemists. And I think what he means here is alchemists more than what we nowadays think about chemists. And then he talks about Gilbert focusing on the magnet, establishing a system of philosophy to coincide with his favorite pursuit. Super into magnets. Everything should be a magnet, right? Or everything should be magnetizable or whatever. So those are some examples of this being attached to a particular science or contemplation. Then the next three all have to do with certain kinds of excess, where we could actually have a proper mean or middle position in a way that's kind of reminiscent of Aristotle and other people who recognize the importance of the mean. So in 55, he's going to discuss, he says, the greatest and perhaps most radical distinction between different men's dispositions for philosophy and the sciences is that some go on one side and some go on the other. The one side is being more into observing differences in things, how things are different from each other. The other in observing resemblances. And he says, a steady and acute disposition can fix its thoughts and dwell on and adhere to a point through all the refinements of differences, but those that are sublime and discursive recognize and compare even the most delicate and general resemblances. And then he says both of these fall into excess by catching at nice distinctions or shadows of resemblance. So finding resemblances where they're not really there, finding distinctions where they're not really there. Some people are better or more oriented towards one, some the other. What we really want is to be in the middle, observing both of these. In 56, he's going to talk about partisanship. So in his time, the big partisanship is between those who think the ancients have it right. For example, Aristotle in his time, right? Lots of people are like, Aristotle had it all figured out. All the answers are there in his text. We just have to read them and that works. Other people are partisans of the moderns. Get rid of all that ancient crap. What we really want is the up-to-date stuff. So he says some dispositions have an unbounded admiration of antiquity. Others eagerly embrace novelty. And then notice what he says. Few can preserve the just medium so as neither to tear up what the ancients have correctly laid down, nor to despise the just innovations of the moderns. Truth, he says, is not to be sought in the good fortune of any particular conjuncture of time, but in the light of nature and experience, which is eternal. So we should throw away these sorts of factions, and the understanding must not allow these factions to hurry them on to agreement or assent. Finally, we have the last one in 57. He talks about the contemplation of nature and bodies, and we can go two different ways with this, both of which are going to be at extreme ends. We've got looking at things in their particularity, or as he's going to say, in their individual form. And when we do this, it distracts and weakens the understanding or intellect. The contemplation of nature and bodies in their general composition and formation stupefies and relaxes it. And he says that what we need is actually looking at both of these. These two species of contemplation must be interchanged, each employed in its turn in order to render the understanding at once penetrating and capacious, right? So again, we don't want to lean too much to one side or the other. And each of these are ways in which, as an individual human being, people go wrong and render themselves less capable of understanding, grasping, and appreciating the truth in natural matters.